when I did this research into the 92%, a lot of my respondents were actually from the UK, the US, Canada, and I knew this number was going to be high, but I didn't expect it to be as high as this. And then when you see the amount of you guys today that have raised your hand, you realize that this isn't something that's just exclusive to any of the nations that I just mentioned. It's something that really spans the globe. And it's more related to do with the fact that we're in product management, as I'll speak about a lot in this talk. So another one, if you can raise your hands for this one, does this look familiar to anyone? Yeah? This is how we all spend our lives, right? I'm like, I can see in here I've got a 1 hour slot on Wednesday to do some work, sometime between 9 and 10 most days, and I've managed to put some breaks in there so I can actually have lunch some of the time. And when I had my leaving speech from Booking.com, everyone was laughing at me because they said, Evie, every single call you're on, you're always cooking or doing something. And I'm like, yeah, because when else was I going to eat? Like, I had no time to do any of those things. I literally used to wake up at 7 a.m. and work for an hour before anyone else would come online and send all of my emails, get everything out of the way. And then at 5 o'clock, I'd make myself a cup of tea and I'd work for another 2 hours because you're not just in meetings back to back this whole time. You're leaving these meetings with actions to take away and extra things to do and decisions to make. And you have to find some time to do that work. Never mind if we're talking about like, oh, let's do discovery and let's have strategy and let's do all of these great product things. Where are you doing that? It's impossible. So this is a problem that I think a lot of people have had. And what happened for me was that I was going through this the whole time, and I'll talk through my story in a bit. But what I realized I couldn't keep doing was trying to do all of these things and be really good at my job. So 3 years ago, I became a consultant and a coach, and I started to work with people to help them with this kind of problem because it's something that I did overcome whilst I was working there to a certain extent, like within the constraints in which we all operate as product people, which can be quite a challenge. And what I found when I started coaching people was around 50% of people that were coming to me were telling me that they had problems with burnout, or they felt like they were trying to do too much and they didn't know how to keep doing it all. So I was like, oh, seems like quite an interesting problem that we should dive into. So about 9 months ago now, I started doing some research to understand how big this problem was. And it turns out it was bigger than I expected. I was expecting it to be about 50% of people, but you've all raised your hands. We all know it's something that impacts practically everyone. So the people that didn't put your hands up, they're the people that I really want to speak to because I'm like, how have you managed to avoid this? Like, credit where credit's due. That's impressive. So in the research, I found that 92% of people said that they had either experienced burnout or they'd been on the verge of burnout. And then when you ask these questions, you ask people if they've been exhausted by work, if they've kind of fallen out of love with their job or they've been mentally distancing themselves from their work, or if you feel negative towards your job. So who, like, sometimes I'm like, show your hands, but you might not want to if there's other people working here, but it's like, who feels like they're scared on a Sunday and they don't want to go to work on Monday? Yeah? Great if you don't, but it's like, even if you love what you do, when you've got so much going on, that feeling negative towards your job can creep up quite a lot of the time. And then the last one is more around like, do you feel like you're not adding that much impact, that you're not as good at your job as you feel like you should be? And I think everyone in here has probably at some point in their product career said, oh, yeah, imposter syndrome. Whether you're new to the role or you get promoted or you take on a new challenge, we all feel this level of imposter syndrome where we don't feel like we're adding the impact that we might want to. And actually, this is all the World Health Organization's official definition of burnout. So when you ask people these questions, and if you've experienced these symptoms, the number's even higher. It's 99% of people. And what happens quite a lot, and I've had a few conversations about this today, is that we don't always self-diagnose burnout. Sometimes we sit there and we go, oh, well, my experience wasn't that bad. I didn't have to take time off sick. I didn't have a total mental breakdown. So maybe I wasn't really burnt out. Maybe I was just stressed, and that's the nature of doing product. But that's not true. Like, if you experience any of these things, you are experiencing burnout, or at least getting yourself really close to the point where it could have a negative impact on yourself, your family life, your social life, your career, and any of your other priorities. And I think that I can vouch for all of you in this room. I know you're all ambitious people that want to be really good at your job and do really fucking well, but you shouldn't be trying to do that at the detriment of other things, which is what I'll talk about through the rest of this and how you can make that happen. So, the real reasons why burnout happens, and the whole point of this talk is like, no one will be able to walk away from this and fix everything, but I want to give you some tips and techniques that you can implement to make it happen, and at least create the awareness that if you're going through this, you're not going through it on your own, and knowing why it's happening will help you to put the right things in place, either for yourself or your organization, to solve it. Because these are the two main reasons. We have these personal factors, and a lot of that comes from the beliefs that you hold, and it's also the nature of being a product person. If you've applied for a job because you thrive in a high-pressure environment, then you're the kind of person that's going to push yourself to achieve more and do more all of the time. And we want to do really well. We want to get promoted, as we spoke about earlier, and we want to develop our careers. And then on the organizational side of things, we also work in these environments and these industries where we're under quite a lot of pressure. So in the survey, I asked people some questions, and 97% of people said that they felt a deep responsibility for their area of the business to perform. And 80% of people said that they were under pressure from their organization to perform. And when you combine these two things, you have this catalyst for burnout, because you've got these highly motivated individuals, you guys here, and you've got these organizations where it might be a startup and you need to make sure you have enough cash in the runway to keep your product going for another month. Or you might work in a large corporate where you've got huge OKRs and there's pressure coming down from the business to make sure you hit your targets to impress your stakeholders. So no matter what environment you're in, you're going to be feeling pressure from the organization, and you're going to be putting that pressure on yourself because you want to do a really good job. And now I'm going to start by talking about the personal factors. So I'm going to tell you a bit of my story. And this story goes way back to when I was 3 years old. And I'm not telling you any of this story for me to show off, for me to brag, for me to talk about how incredible I am, even though it might sound like that when I talk through it. But actually, I'm sharing this story for you guys to all reflect on your own childhood and things that might have happened in your past that have led you to think the way you think now. So, as I mention anything, if you want to take notes on your phones of things that this triggers, put your phone on airplane mode because we'll all get distracted, which I'll talk about in a bit. But if you do see anything coming to mind where you think, oh yeah, this is how I started to behave when I was a kid, and therefore this is what's happening to me now, it's a really good reflection exercise. And that's one of the best things about conferences is you can network, you can have conversations, you might learn some new techniques. But if you can walk away with a different mindset about how you're going to behave going forwards, that's one of the most valuable things that you could take away. So bear with me as I talk about myself for a little while, but it is relevant to you, I promise. So this was me at the age of 3. I'm like a fairly cute child and very happy. Do we all see that big smile? I still have that now, which is a great thing. But when I was 3, I went to a dance competition, a dance show, and I won an award for being the smiliest child there. Great, don't we love an award? And I remember holding it up and like showing it to everyone in the crowd. I had the trophy above my head. I was celebrating like I'd won a football competition. And I was so proud of that moment. And I think the real reason why, and I'm psychoanalyzing myself at the age of 3, so maybe it's not accurate, but my brother and my sister were both very allergic to nuts and to dairy, to the point where they could die if they had those things. And I was the middle child. And therefore, most of my parents' attention went to my brother and my sister to keep them alive, which, fair play, that was the right decision to make. But when I finally got attention for being really good at something, then that started to reinforce the behavior that if I'm really great at stuff, then I get the attention and the praise that I really obviously craved as a 3-year-old child. So sometimes these things can go way back to those kind of moments where you realize the way that you're behaving, even as an adult, can stem from something like that. And then this was me at the age of 5, which I still can't believe some of the time, because I wrote this school report and my own self-reflection. And in that report, I said, I want to improve on every subject. So I was the making of a great product manager. because I was like, I've got lots of friends, I like the clubs. I was clearly great at networking and stakeholder management, and I wanted to improve all of the time. So I ended up in the right career. But actually, this shows that even as such a young child, I didn't know how to just be content or just enjoy what I was doing. I was already trying to push for more. The other factor is that I had 204 days out of 204 days at school for a good attendance. And if anyone has children here, like, you know how sick children get, right? They're sick all of the time. So I don't think I escaped that, but I think I just went to school regardless. For 15 years of my life, I never had a day off sick. And like, again, that can be a great personality trait, but that led me to believe that I always had to work hard and show up, even when I didn't feel well, to do really well and be successful. And then we fast forward a few years. I did extra things, like I was the best chess player in my county in England, and I can't play chess at all anymore because I ended up crying because I lost a match and refused to play again because I couldn't even accept losing at that age. So clearly there was a lot to work on. I also became head girl at school. I graduated with a first-class honours degree in the Dean's Prize for Citizenship, and it's like this whole incredible CV of things that happened. But it just shows that it's because I wasn't settled being content. I always wanted to strive to be the best, even if it was at the detriment of some of my health or sleep or anything else that I did. And at the time, I didn't really realize that. I thought it was an amazing thing. I thought that I had this amazing career ahead of me and I could do anything that I wanted. And that was true, but I obviously took this into my career. And in my early 20s, I pushed myself to the maximum. I constantly tried to get the next promotion. I constantly tried to take on new projects and do really well for myself. And then this happened at the age of 27, and someone said to me, break a leg when I came on the stage. And I'm like, don't worry, I already broke my hip one time. Because at the age of 27, I was running a half marathon and I was trying to get a new personal best because obviously I needed to improve all of the time. And what happened is after about 5 kilometers, I couldn't walk anymore. And has anyone here ever run a race, a half marathon, a marathon? Right, so you know the sweeper bus that comes around and like follows people and the last person's walking and it's really slow. I had to sit on that for about 2 hours of my life. And it was so frustrating because all of my friends were already in the pub and I just wanted to go and join them. Because if you're a British person, if things are going well, you drink. And if things aren't going so well, you still go and drink. So after that, I went to the pub. And then the next day I woke up and I screamed. I screamed in pain getting out of bed. And I told myself, oh, it's probably just muscular. It's not a big deal. But I went to the hospital, and it turns out I'd actually broken my hip from running. And this was the first time that I think my body was trying to show me that I'd been pushing myself too far. And then the story gets even better because I worked every single day that I was in hospital. And the day after my operation, I got on a work call. Fine, no big deal. But has anyone here ever had morphine? It's amazing. I was very happy when I had morphine, but it didn't make any sense. I thought that I was making sense, but it's honestly, if you haven't had it, it's honestly like the way that you act is kind of like you're drunk and you say things without a filter and say things that you shouldn't say, but in your head you feel completely fine. So I hopped on this work call high as fuck on morphine, and it's because my manager was like, well, you're working on this business critical project, so we've not really heard from you all week, so we need to have a call and we need to have a conversation about it. And I was desperate for a promotion, so I said, yeah, sure, like I'll prove my value and I'll jump on this call anyway. So I don't know why I chose to do that, and I don't know why my company thought that was a sensible thing to do, but this is when it comes down to those personal factors, how I felt as an individual, and the organizational factors, which was the pressure that came from the business for me to feel like this was so important that I had to get on a call within 24 hours after having major surgery. And it's not just me. So as I said at the beginning of this, it's not just me that's been through this kind of approach, that's been through these kinds of problems. And I still didn't say that I was burnt out at that point in time. I was dealing with physical health issues. And it was only about a year later where I had gotten a promotion. I was working with more teams. I was working with 2 development teams. I was leading 5 different product managers. I was working on 2 business critical products. My workload was insane. But But I still felt like I needed to prove myself at that level. I still felt like I had to show up and showcase why I deserved to have that job. And it was so much work. I wrote in my diary, I was like, I'm so burnt out. I'm so over the stress. Like, I can't keep going like this. And it was only when it got to that point that I decided to make a change. And I've done so much work since then, and I'll talk to you guys about everything that I've implemented so that you guys can have some techniques to take away. But I just want you to all spend a couple of minutes, based on the story that I've just told you about my past. I want you to take your phones out and write down any beliefs that you might hold at the moment that mean that you're acting in a way at work that might be detrimental to your health or might lead you to burnout. And have a quick think about where you think that might have come from. When was the first time you felt like you needed to be that way? So whether you feel like you have to work really hard all of the time, or if you feel like you can't let people down, or if you feel like you can't say no, take your phones out, write down what those things are, and then we'll talk about what to do with them in a second. And this is where I'm like, put your phone on airplane mode, because you'll all get distracted by WhatsApp messages as soon as you open your phone. Which is fine. I don't blame anyone if you do. It's a quick 2-minute break in between me talking. And there's no pressure. If something isn't coming to mind, then you can just listen to the rest of it. And if you get inspired at some point, you can get inspired at some point. Okay, there's still some writing, so if you're still going, feel free to do so. But I'm going to skip on to the next part, and then if anyone wants to grab me to chat about any of this stuff later, please feel free to do so, because I know it's like there's only so much I can tell you in 45 minutes. So if you feel like you need to go deeper on this stuff, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. But the reasons why, and we've all gone through and we've all thought about what our stories are and why it might be happening. And like I say, like the numbers show it's not just people in this room. When I did the research, the things that I found out were that 63% of people felt like they needed to be perfect at their job, and 59% of people placed the identity that they had of success on their job over anything else. And both of those factors come down to these beliefs and these narratives that you tell yourself that usually stem from something that happened before you even started your career. So you're not even quite sure why you feel like you need to be perfect. And when I first started doing this kind of work and this kind of personal development, I very much thought, well, I have to be perfect because the business expects me to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, I won't get a promotion. I won't get all of these things. And I worked with the coach and she's like, but why is that important to you? And then this is when I really had to realize that I needed to unpick some of those patterns and those beliefs and those behaviors that I held to transform this. And the reason why that's so important is it's not just the number of people that burn out, but the number of people that have burnt out more than once is 72% of those people. So as much as a lot of the advice that people gave was meditate and go for walks and take breaks and turn Slack off at the weekends so you don't work so hard, even when people had implemented those practices, and I was like meditating every day, doing yoga every day, making sure I went for a walk every day. I was adding all of those things to my to-do list, but that didn't stop me from burning out. They're all great practices and all nice to haves that can help with mental health and everything else. But if you deep down feel like you need to be perfect at your job and something goes slightly wrong at work, you're going to attribute that blame to yourself and therefore lead to this pattern where you might work more or you might feel like terrible about everything you're doing at work. So really what we need to solve is the root causes of those beliefs. So what I want you guys to do now, if you get your phones out again, if you wrote down 1 or 2 beliefs that you have, the best way to start to overcome these is to write down what you actually want your narrative to be from now on. So for example, I believed that I had to show up to work even when I didn't feel 100% in order for people to respect me and for me to be good at my job. But then now what I have as a belief is actually it's really beneficial for me to rest when I feel like I need to rest. And if I do that, I'll come back and do a better job. So if you take your phones out and you look at the first one you wrote down, just write down what an alternative thought pattern could be for that instead, that is actually going to be more beneficial to you, your lifestyle, and your career overall. I'm like, I've just remembered that everyone's got a pen and paper in their bags. I should have told everyone to use that instead. Get the merch. And as you're doing this, one of the common things that comes up for people is that they'll go to themselves, oh, but I can't do that. But I can't switch off at 5 o'clock, even though I know that would be beneficial to me. And it's because we still feel this pressure from the organization. So I'll talk about how you can solve some of those bits in a minute. But you really have to want to do these things. You have to want to make that change. So if you've written down what you want a new belief to be from now on, then the only way to embed those things is to whenever you feel like you're getting to the point where you're working in a way that isn't beneficial to yourself, reflect on why you think you're doing that and try and understand the beliefs that you hold that means that that is happening, and then try to rewrite those ones. And for any of the ones that you have rewritten now, you have to remind yourself every single day that that's what you want to actually take forward from now on. Because if you've felt a certain way for 20, 30, 40 years of your life, you can't just write down a new belief right now and then walk out of this room tomorrow and be like, oh, I'm cured, I'll never burn out again. That's not the case. You have to really work on these things and practice it and come back to it all of the time. And you have to really want to make that change. And if you've been through that kind of burnout cycle, if you know how it feels, then hopefully that's enough of a motivation to want to do so. And then the last point that is here is around boundaries. And a lot of people in product especially struggle to set boundaries in their role. I've been guilty of it. I'm like, have any of you here said, I'm going to take a lunch break every single day this week? And then have you actually gone through and done it? Well done. We have a winner over here. This guy knows how to set boundaries. But half of the time we don't. We go in with intentions, is what I'd probably call them. And then as soon as something important comes up, we say, oh, but this really important thing happened, or this person can't make a meeting any other day this week, so I'll just have to take a meeting at that point in time. And actually, the most effective people that I've seen at setting boundaries are ones that do it from the beginning. So if you're new to a role, if you're new to a team, if you've just come back from holiday, for example, if you walk in at that point in time and say, I never take meetings over my lunch break, my diary's blocked out from 12 till 1, I always take lunch, and you make that really clear to everyone, it's far less likely that the people will then try to mess with that boundary that you've put in place. And you can use your discretion, right? If it's the CEO, then maybe sometimes you need to take that meeting. But the rest of the time, it's on to you to then decline that and make it really obvious that you don't take meetings in that time, for example. And again, you have to want to do these things. If you don't want to do it enough, you won't make it happen. Another one around boundaries is like, okay, I've decided that I'm going to do this piece of work this week. I'm going to work on strategy. And then you allow yourself to get distracted by everything else that comes up, by all of the fires that you need to fight. But if you just went offline, blocked a whole day out to make sure you'd work on that thing, you probably would make it happen. But sometimes we don't do that because it feels hard. It actually feels easier to be reactive, and it's good for our ego. We like to feel important. We like to feel like we're needed in all of these spaces, which means that we take on everything and we want to do all of these things. So again, if you recognize any of those things happening for yourself, you really need to question why you're doing that. Why aren't you prioritizing the most important thing? Why aren't you putting yourself first and work on those things? But I can't do a whole therapy session. So if there are things that you need to work on, again, talk to me afterwards, or we can cover off different techniques to help. So yeah, there's other things that come into the personal side of it. We've got things like the personal beliefs that I've just spoken about. There's also things like different people have a different level of tolerance for burnout. So some people are more resilient than others. There's no right or wrong behind that. It's not to say that someone's better if they don't burn out as easily. We've also got different personality traits that have been linked to burnout. So again, this is where the theory that a lot of people that go into product are people that are quite type A personalities. They always want to drive to do more. People are super organized. We love to network. We love to socialize with other people. And there's a lot of ties between some personality traits and the fact that that can lead to burnout, which highly correlate with people that work in product. And then you'll have things like neurodiversity that might also lead to this. So just being aware of these factors, I can't go into them all now, but being aware that these might impact you in a different way and reflecting on your own individual reasons for burnout happening is super important. And then we have the organizational side of things. So the main issues that came up for people in this space were primarily around culture. So we've got things like toxic culture, an unsupportive boss, lacking psychological safety. And those things can be really hard to change. Because if you want to change culture, you have to change beliefs and behaviors. And is anyone here a leader of teams? Okay, so we've got quite a few product leaders. So you guys are in the best place to change this because you can actually start to change it in your team and in your space. If you're the unsupportive boss, obviously you can work on that. But even if the rest of the organization feels like a toxic culture, you can still make sure that you're having your team reviews where you ask people how they're doing. You genuinely check in and you do a health check. Or if you ask someone, how are you? And I had this, I'd speak to my manager and he was like, how are you doing? And I was like, not so great. I've got eczema all over my body and I'm barely sleeping. I'm a bit stressed. And he was like, yeah, cool. So this thing that we need to do next week. And it's like, why bother asking, right? If you're a leader, make sure you're doing the things that you can do to support people. What people actually asked for was that proactive support. So if people are coming to you and saying, I have quite a lot of work on at the moment, can we change a priority, or can I get support in this space, or can something drop? They really appreciate it if you actually go to the effort of trying to help them and make that happen. And people also said that they wanted to be trusted. They wanted to have flexible working, because as much as some people describe burnout as being something that's work-related, that's not totally true. If something else happens in your life, so for example, when I broke my hip, I couldn't still keep giving 120% to work. I could only drop down and give about 50 or 60% to my job at that point in time. And that might happen for a variety of reasons. You might be getting married, you might be moving house, you might be having a child. And these are all things that are going to take away your natural capacity to be able to give so much at work. And we shouldn't be expecting that. We shouldn't be expecting people to give 120% all of the time. If they can give 120% in a great season, but they need to drop down to 80% for other reasons at a different period of time, you're more likely to get continuous high performance and continuous satisfaction from someone than you are to keep pushing them too far. So bear those ones in mind if you're a leader. If you're not a leader, if you need to influence your culture, it can be quite difficult. But the thing that I really recommend that you do is you go and have the vulnerable conversation. And what I mean by that is you go and speak to your leader and you make it really explicit that you are finding things really hard. And you don't just laugh it off. You really talk to them about what the problems are and what you want to do to overcome it. You can propose potential solutions to them. And if they don't listen, at some point, that's the point where you need to try and change jobs, or you need to just try to ignore some of that stuff at work and set your own boundaries and switch off from what you're doing as much, because if they don't support you, they don't deserve your energy. But in some cases, they will be able to support you and they'll be able to put the right things in place. And the other important thing to note is from the research, the people that were less affected by burnout were product managers, but from senior product managers and above, burnout equally impacted everyone. So sometimes you might be that product person and you're feeling that it's tough, but your manager is probably finding it even tougher because they're being squeezed from the team and from the pressure from leadership above. So sometimes they're just putting you under pressure because they don't know how to handle the pressure themselves. But by opening up that dialogue and having that talk to understand what's happening and why, you can all work towards making that a better place. And then back to the organizational side of things beyond culture, there's other stuff that happens in the product space. So when we look back at my diary that looks like this crazy chaos, I'm going to actually ask you guys a question. Who here feels like they're good at multitasking? A few people, a few nods and a few hands up. I like it. I used to think I was really great at multitasking as well. And then there's several stories I could tell you. But there was one time when I was in Latin America with my boyfriend, and we were driving in Chile. And I was driving, technically my mother-in-law's car. And I was on roads that I didn't know. It had a lot of potholes. The Serbian roads are great in comparison to the roads in Chile. I mean it. And I'm British, so I normally drive on the left, and I had to drive on the right-hand side. So I had a lot of factors going on here that were very stressful. And we were having a conversation about something to do with road rules. And the conversation quickly turned into an argument, probably because I was stressed. But before you know it, I was trying to have an argument and pay attention to all of these things. And then my boyfriend was yelling at me because I hit a pothole. And I was like, I can't do it. I can't do all of these things at once. And I thought I was great at multitasking. But actually, I'm not. And some of us will be better than others. But multitasking is actually impossible. It's neurologically impossible. What you're actually doing when you multitask is you're context switching at rapid pace. And when you context switch, you get emotionally exhausted because your brain is constantly trying to change what gear it's in to switch between two different things. So even if you're on these work calls and you're trying to reply to your emails at the same time, but keep one ear out and listen for if someone asks you a question, you're still making yourself so exhausted, which is one of the reasons why you'd finish your work day or your work week and feel like you're completely done. So even if you think you're great at multitasking, it's a great skill to have, but I would recommend that you try and do less of it. And what I would say to do in that space to make that happen is try and do two things. Try to block out time in your diary to work on the things that are important. So for example, take Fridays to work through strategy. And when you do that, switch off Slack. Switch off your emails. Make sure you're getting no distractions or no notifications, because I'm sure most of you, when you went on your phones to write down your beliefs, you saw a notification pop up and then you get distracted, and before you know it, you can't remember what you were meant to be doing, and then you have to take a second to get back into it again. It's okay if you did. If you didn't, then you're already great at this. So it's really about trying to block that time out and have it focused in a certain way. Or you can do the same for your meetings. If you can control your diary, and I would say that everyone actually can, you just, again, have to want to, try to stack things together. So have all of your one-to-ones back to back with each other, or have them set in one afternoon so you're in that headspace, so that you don't have to then enter the personal development headspace in a different day of the week. So you can do two things. One, try to clear out time in your diary, and two, try to manage your diary in an effective way. And then the third thing is always remove as many distractions as you can. And then we've got other things that are more things that you need to try and influence in the organization. So that might be organizational structures. This is a thing that a lot of people struggle with because you're constantly trying to get different teams to work together across different departments. Or you might have things like clarity and transparency. So as we spoke about in some of the talks earlier, if you don't know who your ideal customer is, if you don't actually know whether you're targeting B2B or B2C, if you're working on one area of focus for a quarter and then the next quarter you get pivoted to something completely different, this is all still context switching. This is all still factors that can make it really stressful for people because they're trying to balance so many things at once. And with the structures, you might also be trying to influence loads of different spaces because you're sat between different teams, but you don't have full control over what those decisions should be, which can also be exhausting. So for all of those different reasons, on the organizational side of things, the product management role can be really stressful. And what needs to happen there, again, if you're a product leader, you can speak to your teams and you can identify where they might be having extra stress and extra things to coordinate and extra decisions that they need to make, that they could potentially alleviate some of those concerns by setting yourself up in a different way. Or if you're a product person and you're on the ground and you can notice where you feel frustration, where you feel like you're mad at the way something's being approached or where it's causing you headaches or you're spending so much time. If you reflect on your diary, you might be spending so much time trying to manage your workload with one team. And if you spot those things, then you want to go about going, okay, well, how can we actually change this? Can we change our organizational setup to improve that? And then the next problem that ends up happening for people, let me skip through a few slides, is we get to this point where we've then realized that we need to make all of these changes. So we need to focus more on how we have OKRs and set impact. We need to focus on collaboration. Well, we also need to improve data and KPIs, and we want to do more discovery and more delivery, and I want to create the right product culture. And this is the nature of what usually happens, is that we realize there are so many things that we want to change because we're all ambitious people that love to drive change, that we then feel overwhelmed because we're trying to do our day job and make all of this happen at the same time. So if that is the case, I would highly recommend using something like this, which is a change roadmap, and breaking down where you're at now and where you want to get to and what the different steps are along the way that you need to take to get there. And then that allows you to see that you're constantly making progress towards hitting your goals. And it also allows you to just go, okay, I'm only going to focus on this one thing at this point in time because I can't solve everything. We still have to prioritize the change that we need to make and where we want to focus to allow us to add the most impact. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. No, they're all of the main points. So the question that I'm going to leave you with is, are you willing to put the important before the urgent? So as I've said so many times in this talk, you have to want to drive the change. And so often you'll leave this kind of conference and you'll go back to your day job and you'll say, yeah, I heard about burnout and I don't want to burn out again. But it's actually easier to just keep working the way that I'm working right now and not implementing any of these changes. But if you really are serious about having a sustainable career where you can love your product management career forever, and again, someone joked earlier, they were like, of course, if you work in product, you're going to burn out. And honestly, it is a stressful role. You're never going to alleviate all of these things. But based on everything that I've just told you, there will be one or two changes that feel realistic for you that you can go and implement from next week to make this happen. So definitely spend your weekend reflecting on this. Remember this talk when you go into the office on Monday morning and make sure you put some of those changes into place. And I'm just going to leave you with this QR code as well, if anyone wants to scan it. This is the link to the full report with all of the research and all of the tips and techniques about how to overcome it. And anything else that I have on burnout, I will make sure I send to you guys as well to give you more in-depth knowledge on this topic and allow you to make some changes.